Hey everybody, welcome to Let's Get Learned. Today we're going to be talking about the Hypomanic Edge by John D. Gartner. A link between a little craziness and a lot of success in America. Alright, before continuing, I think it's pretty wise to explain what hypomania is. I'm going to read a quote from page 2. Hypomania is a mild form of mania, often found in the relatives of manic depressives. Hypomanics are brimming with infectious energy, irrational confidence, and really big ideas. They think, talk, and move and make decisions quickly. Anyone who slows them down with questions just doesn't get it. Hypomanics aren't crazy but normal, quote unquote. If not the first word that comes to mind while describing them, hypomanics live on the edge between normal and abnormal. Alright, so this book basically talks about Hypomanic's relationship with the United States. Not just with entrepreneurship, but with also you'll find out with the clergy. So here are some key characteristics that Hypomanics and American entrepreneurs have together, and so I'm going to read them out. Some of these are going to be common themes without people in the book, but look through them yourself and see if you have any of these. Alright, I'm going to start off with the traits. He is filled with energy. He is flooded with ideas. He is driven, relentless, and unable to keep still. He channels his energy into achievement and wildly grand ambitions. He often works on little sleep. He feels brilliant, special, chosen, perhaps even destined to change the world. He can be euphoric. He becomes easily irritated by minor obstacles. He is a risk taker. He overspends in both his business and personal life. He acts out sexually. He sometimes acts impulsively with poor judgment in ways that can have painful consequences. He is fast talking. He is witty and gregarious. I put in the corner fond of company and sociable because I didn't know what gregarious meant. His confidence can make him charismatic and persuasive. He is also prone to making enemies and feels he is persecuted by those who do not accept his vision and mission. America is a hypomanic nation. In this book, it mostly talks about people of European descent, but I'd like to argue that the First Nations are also pretty much hypomanic, because let's think about it. To cross the Bering Land Bridge, I think you have to be hypomanic to do something like that. Well, anyway, let's continue. America attracted and attracts people of hypomanic character. America is a nation of immigrants. That's important actually because we are of a nation of immigrants, we are hypomanic because hypomanic people usually are immigrants. America has a high rate of bipolar disorder compared to non-immigrant nations like Japan. That's important because, yet again, immigrants tend to have hypomanic tendencies. 10% of Americans are descended from people of the Mayflower, was also important because they are radical, well, not radical, but they were religious individualists who had hypomanic tendencies. The American character and Protestant work ethic is hypomanic in nature. He also says that the American temperament is largely hypomanic. All right, the first hypomanic person to influence America is Christopher Columbus. John refers him to as the messianic entrepreneur. Christopher Columbus claimed he heard voices from God. He heard so many voices, he wrote them down in his book, the Book of Prophecies, that I think added that the Garden of Eden was in Panama, and so he tried to do some pretty crazy stuff. When Christopher went to go talk to the King of Portugal, he turned him down because he said he was crazy. Yeah, the King of Portugal thought Christopher Columbus was an absolute Looney Tune. Pretty much told him he had to get out. But when he went to go talk to the Queen Isabella of Spain, he ended up charming her. The voyage and God's plan. Charming her about the voyage and God's plan. Yeah, Isabella, strangely enough, thought Christopher was very charming, and they apparently talked all night. Isabella was also very deeply religious, and whenever someone stirred her up about, oh, God's divine mission, that was music to her ears. Christopher and the Queen Isabella happily talked all night, and it was reported that Christopher would not shut up. That is also a hypomanic tendency, that people who are hypomanics, they just go on and talk, and they don't stop. Before he left for the voyage, he wanted to be titled Don, Viceroy of the New Lands, and Admiral of the Expedition. Yeah, John kind of talks about that. This wasn't really possible. Hypomanics tend to have this big vision and they try to pursue that big goal, but this wasn't really realistic. Isabella almost didn't give this to him because it was like, well, why are you asking for all this stuff? It's kind of crazy. But she ended up giving it to him. But I thought it was kind of funny because once this whole thing turned profitable, once he did go find a new world and told him back, and once Spain sent all their conquistadors over and stuff, and once they started establishing colonies and started turning a profit, they immediately revoked Christopher Columbus of his Don, Viceroy, and Admiral titles because they didn't want him to be a part of it. All right, now we have our next three. During the colonial age of America, we have John Winthrop, William, and Penn. Penn's name was also William as well, but it's a different William in the middle. I just don't know his first name. I also spelled John Winthrop's name wrong. I put an L in there. That's okay. Ignore that. All right, so John Winthrop. He believed he received message from God to start the New Jerusalem and the New World. So apparently at this time he was in England and he started hearing voices, and God was telling him, you have to go to the New World. Apparently John belonged to this sect of Christianity that was kind of being persecuted upon in England, so they decided to giddy up and giddy out and go to the New World. When he was approaching the New World, he gave a speech as if he was Moses, saying, everybody had a covet with God to make America the city on the hill, the New Jerusalem. Yeah, John remained fiercely optimistic even when he soon died. When his son, it says soon, it's supposed to be son, died along with 200 more during the first winter. Yeah, so apparently he got landed, they went right to work, they were not prepared, and a whole bunch of people died, including his son, and John's like, you know what, we're having a great time, we're on God's mission, everything is great. Throughout all the hardship, he remained uncannily optimistic as when he first arrived. As crazy as that sounds, I guess there was some good in it, because he did start the colony, and it was all downhill from there. William was a firebred preacher in the colony of Massachusetts. Although he was tossed around from church to church because he would make poor judgments in the state-run churches, William openly talked about separation from the British Crown, and he actively sent letters to the British Crown. I mean, literally, he sent letters to the king, saying that he shouldn't have to put up with his silly rules. William was America's first separationist. He was pretty avid on it. William founded the colony of Rhode Island with John Winthrop because he needed a place to lay low to escape the British military. Yeah, the king was not very happy with William, and he was going to send troops to his house to imprison him. But John got a hold of this, and he actually went to William and said, hey, you got to get out of here. They're after you. So John and William went to go found the colony of Rhode Island. Soon after he settled in Rhode Island, the Quakers needed a place to settle because they were not welcome in Massachusetts. Yeah, the Quakers, when they landed in Massachusetts, they were not welcome because they were too radical of a different sect, and they were started to get killed, and they were persecuted against. So they're like, oh, we need a new place to stay. When the Quakers arrived, William had an intensive theological debate with them. Okay, so the Quakers needed a place to stay. They asked if they could stay at Rhode Island. William said, yeah, sure, because he was a preacher and they were Christians after all. So yeah, when the Quakers arrived, William had an intensive theological debate with them. It lasted for 3 days and about to go on 4, but the Quakers begged William to stop talking. Yeah, so Hypomanics tend to be very, very passionate sometimes, and he went on a 3 to 4 day rant, basically, in a heavy theological debate on why they were different from everybody else. And he was, of course, his profession was a preacher, so he was really into it. And they just begged him to stop. They were just like, okay, you need to calm down. William Penn. Penn was a Quaker from England. So his Quaker story is a little strange because apparently Penn used to be a dandy. If you don't know what that is, it's basically someone who was very flamboyant and dressed very flamboyantly. But I guess he fell in love with the Quakers because they were so modest, right? Let's think about that for a minute. It's rebellious to be modest, I suppose, to Penn. And then he joined the Quaker religion, and then he actually left for a period of time, and then he rejoined the Quaker religion. So he was a Quaker, he left, and then he became one again, and then he stayed that way. So yeah, Penn was a Quaker from England with ties to the British upper class. He was given a plot of land that was later given the name of Pennsylvania. Yeah, he wanted to name it something else, but that never really caught on, so it became Pennsylvania. Penn felt inspired to make the city of brotherly love in Pennsylvania. Yeah, because Penn saw how other Christians were separating in the colonies, and he wanted to make one colony where everybody could come together and live peacefully in one colony. And this actually became the forefront for America in general, where anybody, no matter what, could come to a place and live peacefully with everybody else. With a big vision of a colony of liberty where everyone could practice what religion they wanted to practice without fear of persecution. And this project of what the city brotherly love, that actually had a major impact in the city of Philadelphia, right? Became a huge success, and it was a very popular city. The trade was booming, commerce exploded, and actually served him very well. The reason why this was hypomanic, because he had this godly vision, and he wanted to go make that vision a reality, right? So he had this unworldly vision of making this massive city, this enormous city, this amazing colony, and he did it, and it worked. That was his hypomanic tendencies at work, or hypomanic nature at work. All right, and in the pre-revolution / revolution phase of America, we have Alexander Hamilton, who's actually my favorite in this whole entire book. I absolutely love the guy. Alexander Hamilton was without a doubt a bipolar type 2, John says. Richard Brookshire said Hamilton was subject to moods which could be noisy and destructive as fireworks, or dark and depressing. Hamilton regularly got himself in trouble for his arrogance, womanizing, and poor failures of judgment. Hamilton was a manic depressive and had a hypomanic charm that could make people laugh. Yeah, there's a common theme with, I guess, hypomanics is that they could be very depressive as well. They could be manic on both sides of the spectrum. As soon as an idea came to Hamilton, he would act on it without fear of consequences. He was impulsive and was blatantly hostile to anyone he thought was after him. Yeah, that's a pretty common tendency with hypomanics throughout this book. He was a sexual and financial risk taker, always overspending in his financing. I guess that's also a hypomanic tendency that's pretty mainstream. John Adams liked to call Hamilton a foreign bastard and the bastard brat of a Scottish peddler, because Hamilton was born and raised on the Caribbean island of Nevis. Actually, and if you look in the corner right-hand part of the slide, that is a picture of Nevis, the island where Hamilton was born. He was born out of wedlock. His mother had a reputation of sleeping around the island, and his dad was an entrepreneur who failed in all of his business ventures. Yeah, so that's actually, John likes to make the case with Hamilton that he inherited his hypomanic tendencies because both of his parents had hypomanic tendencies. Apparently his mom going around and sleeping around the island for women is could be a sign of hypomanic. And for his dad being an entrepreneur and also not succeeding, probably not the succeeding part, but his entrepreneurship was a sign of his hypomanic tendencies. Also, the fact that they both immigrated to the Caribbean from England is also a sign of hypomanic tendencies. Hamilton liked to see himself as Caesar, was also a hypomanic tendency. I guess hypomanics like to see themselves as gods, or they take in a role model that was a deity or someone really great throughout history. After he came to the colonies and during the Revolutionary War, he was the Secretary of Treasury. He provoked America's first sex scandal. Hamilton's actions always straddled bold and suicidal. Yeah, he actually went to the colonies actually by an offer for someone that was going down to the island of Nevis for trading. He knew this guy growing up, and he went over to the colonies. He actually, I guess, went to a university in New Jersey, and he kind of became part of the educated class and got mixed in with the revolutionaries. Hamilton arranged a constitutional convention to ratify the Articles of Confederation. That's a typo, it's supposed to be Confederation. Because he wanted a larger federal government. Okay, so this kind of stemmed from his Hamilton's behavior, because this was largely unpopular amongst everybody else. And because he wanted a larger federal government, everybody hated him for it. He wanted to be more like Britain because he thought Britain was powerful because they had a large centralized government. And everybody was like, we just won a war against Britain and you want us to become more like Britain. Really, Alexander? Everyone at the convention hated him for this proposal and openly called him a monarchist. Even George Washington gave him a disapproving glance. Yeah, so George Washington was Alexander's sugar daddy. Whenever Alexander needed someone to back him up, he would always go to Washington. As Secretary of Treasury, he didn't want America to be bankrupt like his dad, so he decided to put all debt in the National Bank, which he created. Nobody liked it for that either, and make monthly payments like his mom did when she had her store. America has the best credit out of any nation because of this decision. Yeah, apparently we've been paying debt monthly since for like 200 and something years. It's pretty crazy. I haven't missed a payment. Hamilton created the National Bank and the New York Stock Exchange. Hamilton later died in a duel and was buried in a church cemetery on Wall Street. So yeah, he created Wall Street and then he was buried on Wall Street. The person that, if he did not die in a duel, he was most likely would have replaced Jefferson for president. He would most likely replace Jefferson for president, for the third American president. All right, now we go on to Andrew Carnegie, another famous American hypomanic. Andrew's grandfather was a socialist revolutionary in Scotland. So this ties in because John talks about how hypomanic behavior could be hereditary. And so I guess Andrew's grandfather was a very messianic socialist revolutionary in Scotland. So Andrew most likely would have inherited his hypomanic behavior from his grandfather. Was also kind of funny because he was a socialist revolutionary, and then Andrew Carnegie embraces capitalism in his life and becomes one of the most capitalist people on the earth at that moment. They were both hypomanic. Carnegie was overly optimistic and he thought he couldn't fail at anything. This is also a hypomanic tendency. Andrew and his parents moved to America because they lost their land. They lost their hand weaving business to mechanization. Andrew's first job in America was a bobbin boy in a textile mill, but he didn't care. He always looked at the positive and was optimistic. Another hypomanic tendency. Soon after, he got a job in the telegraph office and learned all the businesses, streets, and cities of Pittsburgh and got a big raise. This was also because of his hypomanic tendency. He kind of learned everything on his own, didn't really ask for anybody for help. Carnegie himself earned half the wage of his household, a whooping, I think it was $3 a week, but he still earned half the wage in his household. Andrew then learned how to telegraph and decode messages, then got another raise for $4 a week. Yeah, how the story went is that Andrew was not supposed to do that, and he almost got in trouble desperately got in trouble because he almost caused a collision. Um, that's also something that is hypomanic, is because I guess hypomanics can make quick decisions on a fly, and that whole thing where it's like the whole morality thing is like, should I do this and should I do not, kind of gets taken out of the option, so they just make quick rash decisions on a whim that would be difficult usually for anybody else. Then you got a raise for $4 a week. Andrew then went and bought a house for him and his mom for $550. He then became a telegraph operator for the Pennsylvania Railroad, then got paid $35 a month. He got that job because of his other boss. Andrew Carnegie fell in love with America. He desperately fell in love with America. He thought it was way better than Britain. He was madly patriotic and looked up to her as a hero. The only thing he didn't like about America was slavery. He thought slavery would die out on its own accord. Later in his railroad career, he bought 10 shares of Adams Express for $500, which he got off of a loan from somebody else. Then he got a $10 dividend check every week. Then he immediately fell in love with capitalism. He gave Woodruff Sleeping Car Company $1,000 for 50% equity in the company. And that's actually how he got all of his money in his earlier part of his career, is he just started investing. And so he had multiple streams of income. Which I'm going to go on a side tangent on this one, because people say it's like, oh, is it better to have multiple streams of income and then have one, or just have one thing that brings in all of your money? Well, according to Andrew Carnegie, in your earlier part, you have multiple streams of income, and then you take all of that and then you put in the one thing. So I guess the answer to that question is actually, you have multiple streams in the beginning, and then you sell all that off, or you liquidate it, and then you put all that equity into one thing, and then that one thing you put all your effort in, and then that gives you all your money in the long run. Andrew was known for working a whole 24 hours nonstop without sleeping, was a hypomanic tendency. During the Civil War, Andrew was sent with his crew to go repair telegraph lines in Annapolis and worked 3 days nonstop. I mean, he literally worked 3 days nonstop to get them working again, because the Confederacy bombed the bridges and the Union was not able to mobilize effectively into Confederate lands. After that, he rebuilt the bridge in Alexandria in 7 24-hour days. Andrew ended up getting a job for the War Department Telegraph Office. Abraham Lincoln would visit him and see how the war was going. Andrew developed a deep admiration for Abraham Lincoln. Yeah, Andrew Carnegie looked up to Abraham Lincoln as if he was Jesus or something. He had this really, really deep admiration for Abraham Lincoln. Carnegie would give Abraham Lincoln advice even if he never asked for any. Yeah, he would. This is also another hypomanic thing. Carnegie would just lay on advice to Abraham. He never even asked for it, but he always put his 2 cents in on what he should do. After the Civil War, Andrew visited his hometown in Scotland and was disappointed because it was smaller than he thought and nothing has changed. Yeah, in the book he kind of talks about Carnegie went back home to Scotland, and then he went to his aunt's and uncle's shop, and then he was like, why is it so small? And then his aunt's like, well, what do you expect? This is just a dainty little town in the middle of Scotland. What did you expect was going to happen? And so he was kind of struck in the negative sense. Andrew went back to the States. He started working on a bridge contracts for Mississippi and Missouri rivers. During this time, he was worth more than $400,000, was a crap ton of money in those days, and bought his mom a new house and a brand new carriage, which he told his mom that he was going to buy for her since they moved to America. So that was kind of like fulfilling a childhood prophecy. And this is also another thing. This comes up later, but hypomanics tend to be mama's boys. They tend to have this deep love for their mothers for whatever reason. And this actually comes up quite a bit in other hypomanics as well. So as far as his dad actually died because I guess his dad and his mom were competing. No, His dad and Carnegie were competing for their mother's love, I guess, and his dad eventually physically gave up and he died. I guess his life was too hard on him, and he just gave out. Andrew would push them him it's themselves supposed to be 100 to himself 100% with everything he had. Andrew wanted to go into manufacturing, so he went overseas to England to Henry Bessemer Steel Works. Andrew witnessed the accident that produced steel, then rushed back home to the States to form a mill and to put all of his eggs in the steel. That's a famous quote from Andrew Carnegie: "Is put all your eggs in one basket." Um, yeah, so for the steel works, he witnessed the accident, I guess, when they were taking the molten steel, or the hot metal that was formed in the steel. Some air compressor, I guess, popped and I guess blew a whole bunch of air into the steel, and it or pushed air into the iron, rather should I say, and then it produced steel and actually became stronger. Andrew witnessed this accident while he was there, and he's like, "Oh, I have an idea." So he went back to the States to go produce steel. It's also noted that entrepreneurs don't really come up with the ideas for the products they sell. They just see the opportunity and they just go try to make it happen. Carnegie was known for being an energetic plunger and a dangerous leader. Yeah, this everybody hates him for this later on. Was also a hypomanic tendency. When Carnegie gave his leadership position to his brother Tom, when he went on vacation, everybody was relieved. Like I said, Andrew Carnegie was a pretty hard-pressed leader. He thought everybody could work like he works, which they can't. So he literally pushed everybody to their max, and it was really hard on everybody, especially his managers, as you'll find out. Hypomanic entrepreneurs need a normal person to create a counterbalance. It's kind of like a fail-safe, so they don't wreck their behavior, or their behavior doesn't wreck the whole operation. So Andrew Carnegie's counterbalance was always his production manager. One time, a friend of Carnegie asked him to co-sign a loan for his failing business, but Carnegie chose not to. This was actually pretty important because Andrew Carnegie just signed a loan to the bank for a steel mill, and a buddy of his who was running a business went to Carnegie to co-sign his loan. The banks got a hold of this, and bank executives rushed out of their offices down the city to go meet with Carnegie because they thought he co-signed the loan, and they were going to ask for all their money back. But when they got inside of wherever he was, his property or his home, he told them he didn't co-sign the loan, and because of this, he was able to have amazing credit for the rest of his life. Carnegie hurled himself to beat the British steel mills. Yeah, so most of steel manufacturing at that time was in Britain, and they kind of had a monopoly on the whole manufacturing of steel. He did this in a three-step formula for success: cut costs, scoop the market, and run the mills full. This had drastic effects on the British steel mill. He later beat the British steel mills by hard driving production and replacing equipment with new technology. He also beat the British by transporting it faster. So the new technology thing, that really helped him because the British steel mills, they were very frugal. They didn't like spending money on new equipment. But Andrew Carnegie's philosophy was, let's keep on buying new equipment after, let's say 6 months, and it'll help us speed up the process in the bigger picture. So that's something that he did. It worked really, really well for him, but also sparked innovation. So he actually created more jobs and more, I guess you could say, mechanical engineers, got a lot bigger jobs, trying to create new and efficient methods of, producing steel. So this actually had a ripple effect across the whole, I guess you could say, economic environment, and this was actually beneficial for everybody. Carnegie had a promotion system based off of hypomanic behavior. Carnegie had a messianic hypomanic apathy towards evolutionism and became a strong believer in survival of the fittest. Well, you can see how this would be very convenient for him. He hated the fact his employees complained about 12-hour workdays, and most of Carnegie's production managers and even his brother died from stress and overexhaustion. I guess a lot of production managers that worked for Carnegie died from the overbearing stress load of their jobs and of alcoholism relating to their stressful job. That's how his brother Tom died, was because he lost his life due to alcoholism. Going through people quickly is a hypomanic tendency. Yeah, they kind of hypomanic people go through people like chopsticks. After the Homestead incident, J.P. Morgan bought Carnegie Steel Mill for $480 million. In today's money, that is equivalent to $15 billion. Yeah, so the Homestead incident was basically a lot of Carnegie's workers rebelled against Carnegie because Carnegie never accepted their pleas for less workloads, and they revolted. And what Carnegie decided to do was that he decided to send private militias to go fight his steel mill workers. That was not a good idea. Carnegie later felt guilty for this later on, but he never really did anything about it in the moment. As a matter of fact, he lied and said he was in Scotland at the time, and he kind of, after this incident, he kind of thought he should probably retire. When Andrew Carnegie retired, he went back to his hometown of Scotland and donated a library and opened up a public park. He argued every successful entrepreneur should give up his money by the time he died. Carnegie spent $50 million by opening up 2,811 libraries in all the states of the Union, except Rhode Island, in 11 countries. He donated $10 million to Scotland's university system in scholarships. He gave large sums of money to black-funded colleges in America because he was very sympathetic to the slavery issue when he first arrived. He also put $10 million towards the Hero Fund to award young heroes. It was this fund where if someone did a brave act and they proved it, they would give some money to that little kid who was a hero. Carnegie also gave $4 million to a fund that compensated all of his employees and their families of those who died. He also gave money to someone just because she looked like his mom. Andrew Carnegie put $15 million towards the TIAA, what is a university professor retirement system. He also put $4 million toward a pension plan for a few hundred random people that was in his life and he wanted to donate to him. Andrew Carnegie put $15 million towards the TIAA, what is a university professor retirement system. He also put $4 million toward a pension plan for a few hundred random people that was in his life and he wanted to donate to him. Andrew Carnegie put $15 million towards the TIAA, what is a university professor retirement system. He also put $4 million toward a pension plan for a few hundred random people that was in his life and he wanted to donate to him. Andrew Carnegie put $15 million towards the TIAA, what is a university professor retirement system. He also put $4 million toward a pension plan for a few hundred random people that was in his life and he wanted to donate to him. Andrew Carnegie put $15 million towards the TIAA, what is a university professor retirement system. He also put $4 million toward a pension plan for a few hundred random people that was in his life and he wanted to donate to him. Andrew Carnegie put $15 million towards the TIAA, what is a university professor retirement system. He also put $4 million toward a pension plan for a few hundred random people that was in his life and he wanted to donate to him. Andrew Carnegie put $15 million towards the TIAA, what is a university professor retirement system. He also put $4 million toward a pension plan for a few hundred random people that was in his life and he wanted to donate to him. Andrew Carnegie put $15 million towards the TIAA, what is a university professor retirement system. He also put $4 million toward a pension plan for a few hundred random people that was in his life and he wanted to donate to him. Andrew Carnegie put $15 million towards the TIAA, what is a university professor retirement system. He also put $4 million toward a pension plan for a few hundred random people that was in his life and he wanted to donate to him. Andrew Carnegie put $15 million towards the TIAA. Next we go on to the hypomanics and the film industry in the early 20th century. Yeah. So before this section, it kind of talks about the Jews immigrating from Eastern Europe into the Americas, where the Louis Selznick and Mayer are descended from, or came from, in instance. So Louis Selznick ran away from Kiev when he was 12. He went to England and worked in a British factory for 5 years to save up enough money to go to America in 1889. When he landed in America, he became a jeweler's apprentice and opened up his first jewelry store at 21. By 24, he had 3 stores. He opened up the world's largest jewelry store in New York, but it tanked because he had a hypomanic obsession of going too strong, too fast. He decided to go into the movie business because he said his idiot friend made a lot of money doing it, so why can't he? So that's actually a true story. I guess he had a friend that he thought was a complete idiot, and that friend went to the film industry, but he started making some money. So he was like, I should go into that business too. Selznick walked into Universal Pictures' office and gave himself a job. He pretended to work and taught himself the movie business. Yeah, that's a true story. So he went to the Universal Pictures office, just walked in, pretended like he was an employee, and he energetically started boasting at orders. And when people asked us, do you work here? He's like, yeah, you hired me 2 days ago. What are you talking about? What an absolute Looney Tune. And by doing this, he taught himself the movie business so he could go into it. They eventually found out 3 weeks later, and they asked him to leave the premises. Selznick then started the World Film Corporation. Selznick got an actress to work for him called Clara Kimball, and her acting got Selznick his start in filmmaking success. Selznick put up electric signs around the theater district to advertise his work and to anger his rival Zucker. Zucker and Selznick later joined together to form a company, because what happened is Zucker outbought Kara Kimball, and obviously without Kara Kimball, he would be out of business, so they eventually ended up partnering. Alright, so Zucker and Selznick later joined together to form a company. Right. So Selznick was a hypomanic with his money and spent it like crazy. Yeah, apparently this guy spent his money on everything and anything. He spoiled his kids like mad. His company was worth $23 million and had to go bankrupt because he couldn't pay a $3,000 debt. Can you imagine that? Having $23 million and you couldn't pay $3,000, right? In 1907, movies started being filmed in Los Angeles. By 1918, Zucker's Paramount and Lamel's Universal were on top. The Selznicks and the Mayers. Right. So Mayer came to town in 1918 and made his first film, Old Kentucky. One of Mayer's partners said he was always full of energy and he never sleeps. Mayer was also afraid of failure. Mayer would say, I would rather commit suicide before filing for bankruptcy. Around the time of 1918, Mayer built one of the largest horse breeding farms in the country, right? So it's kind of, they just go out and they're very energetically not focused. They could go into anything. So right, he came to town to be a film producer, but he ended up making a really large breeding farm. That's completely unrelated, but he did it. Lowell and Mayer came together to form MGM. Mayer had dreams of making MGM big, and in 3 decades, Mayer became the highest salary earner in America at $1 million a year. He knew hundreds of employees personally, and his mom said he was very emotional, and sometimes his emotions bordered insanity. He was always an extremist. Mayer didn't know how to read English, so when he wrote his scripts, he would physically act out what he wanted the actors to do. Mayer realized the less money you make, the more movies you watch. During the Great Depression, the movie industry was barely affected. Mayer didn't like portraying men disrespecting women in his films. He wanted to promote American family values. Mayer was so proud to be American, he made his birthday Independence Day, and he didn't know his birthday because he didn't know when he was born. And him not liking portraying disrespecting women is because he was mama's boy, so he didn't like anything about um, men disrespecting women because he saw women in very high regard. Mayer used his film studio to export American values overseas. The world fell in love with America because of his films. Yeah, he was very overly patriotic about America. Alright, so I wanted to touch on these two really quick. So, as a kind of a background, Louis Selznick ended up moving to Hollywood, and so um, Mayer and Louis Selznick they competed against each other, but they know each other very well. So David Selznick is Selznick's son, and then Irene is Mayer's daughter. They ended up becoming in a relationship, and they eventually married each other. The reason why Irene liked David is because David had hypomanic tendencies like her father. So Irene was used to living in a very energetic, kind of crazy, always entertaining household. So she was attracted to David because he had those same characteristics. David reminded Irene a lot of her father, so they ended up getting together. Um, Although David, he started taking benzos, what was back in the, I forget what the professional name, but he started taking benzos, which I guess a lot of movie people back in those days took. I know Shirley Temple would take benzos, and the whole idea was to give you, in essence, hypomanic tendencies, so you don't go to sleep easy, you're up like energetic for a lot of time during the day. Well, it turns out if you give a hypomanic person benzos, they actually turn from hypomanic into manic. So over long use, like I think it was like a 15-year period of David taking benzos, he went crazy, like literally crazy, and he was up all the time. He had a massive gambling problem, so he spent all of his money on gambling. Irene hired cooks to cook for David because Irene had no idea when he was going to be up or when he was going to go to sleep. So David was on a whole different schedule of his own, and the cooks kept on quitting because they thought the job was too stressful. Well, anyway, David, in his manic state, made Gone with the Wind, what was the best video or best movie that was produced at that time. So it was a huge success. His manic behavior, he spewed a lot of that out into Gone with the Wind. It was a major success, but because of David's manic behavior, he wasn't able to capitalize on the movie, and he ended up blowing his whole fortune on gambling. Irene eventually left David because David had an affair with somebody else. And I guess apparently David had affairs with, I guess, any women that would walk into his office. So he had this, was also a hypomanic tendency. So he was very uh, not in sexual control of himself. So I just kind of want to talk about David and Irene because it kind of shows how hypomanic tendencies tend to be hereditary. I kind of showed that aspect of the story as well. All right, here we go to the last person mentioned in the book, Craig Venter. Craig in his life is described as someone who played God, an egomaniac, and an a-hole. When Craig was a kid, he would ride his bikes on an airport runway and get chased out by the police. That was fun for him. He boycotted a spelling test in 7th grade, and in high school he organized a protest to fire a teacher who was giving him Fs, which he well deserved. So this guy, he obviously did not care. He combated everything. Craig was descended from evangelical Mormons. Remember, evangelical religious people are very passionate religious people. They tend to be hypomanics as well, especially if they're a preacher. His grandpa was a passionate preacher. He moved to Southern California to live with his grandma. Later, he was drafted in 1964 and went to Balboa Navy Hospital, where he got into a romantic relationship with a nurse that was his superior officer, so he couldn't control himself sexually. She told him he had to cut his hair, and he responded saying F off. Venter was then court-martialed and had to go to the brig for 6 weeks of labor. He got out of it by lying and losing his orders. He actually sends... When he was driving his motorcycle to the place he was supposed to report to, he just kind of threw his orders off the motorcycle. He did not care. And was tasked to clean the barracks for refusing to cut his hair. So when he went to the office, he was like, I lost my report. So they looked up his report. All they got was that he refused to cut his hair. So they gave him an actual different discipline than what he was originally ordered. After he was sent to the field hospital and then ended up in the brig for telling a superior officer to F himself. So yeah, he went to go work in the field hospital as his punishment, and then he ended up getting in the brig because he told a superior officer to F himself. He was not afraid of consequences. After seeing so many wounded men in the field hospital, he decided to commit suicide. I guess it was very rough for him, and to give you a placement, this was in Vietnam. Venter chose to commit suicide by swimming out to sea. A little side note, Venter was actually a professional swimmer. He swam competitively since he was a kid, so he was really, really good at swimming, so he decided to swim out to sea to kill himself. Venter chose to commit suicide by swimming out to sea. In the middle of his attempt, he thought to himself, what am I doing? So he swam back. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. Craig said his brush with suicide changed his life, and it was an energizing experience. Yeah, some call this contacting the sublime. Back in the States, Venter entered college at the University of San Diego. He got his bachelor's degree in 2 years. Craig later got a job as a research assistant in the lab of a biochemist called Nathan Kaplan. Venter wanted to be a biochemist when he provided his professor right by proving the neurotransmitter receptor was outside the cell. He continued to make advances in his field and was offered a job in Buffalo, New York. Craig offended his colleagues on day one by calling their prize student a mediocre piece of doo-doo. Yeah, that's actually a true story. So they were very happy to show Craig their most achieving student. Craig looked at his work and he's like, wow, what a mediocre piece of doo-doo. Craig never really understood why nobody liked him. He thought he was great. That's also very hypomanic. Venter had a tendency of cycling in and out of clinical depression. So I don't know if I mentioned later on in this video, but hypomanics could also be manic depressives as well. They tend to go on the extreme of both sides of the spectrum. Averaging 10 to 20 times a year. So he would cycle in and out of depression 10 to 20 times a year. That sucks. He developed before I move on, I kind of want to mention he had a girlfriend at the time, and he would always come home and tell his girlfriend about his wonderful idea. And whenever his girlfriend would say, no, that's actually a stupid idea, Craig would get in her face about it, and he would be very passionate and be like, why do you think it's a bad idea? So what it actually almost ruined the relationship because then she would start crying. So what his girlfriend learned to do was whenever Craig would come home with a brilliant idea, she would be like, "Oh, sounds great, honey." And I guess that's what saved their relationship, I suppose. He developed the EST gene splicing shortcut and decided to antagonize Watson. I guess that was kind of uh, radical in those days. I guess it was kind of like he was kind of breaking the rules, quote unquote, or code of ethics by doing that because he didn't want to do it by hand because he said it took too slow of a time, so he wanted to do it faster. So he used the splicing shortcut, and I think this actually had to go into U.S. Congress, and I think it was a battle between Craig and Watson battling out in Congress, and Congress just like, we don't know what to do, guys, because this is so beyond our expertise. Well, anyway, Craig later got a $10 million grant to splice. He couldn't use his EST method, so he gave the money back and quit, right? So he just handed over $10 million. He's like, it's either my way or the highway. Venture later signed a deal with HGS for 10% ownership of the company. I'd also like to mention before I start this slide is I guess it was known that when Craig was working with his coworkers, they would call him Darth Venter. That was his nickname. Venter decided to work with Smith to map out the genes of bacterium. Venter would make decisions regardless if they were right or wrong. So this is kind of why he was so successful with what he was doing. It was basically he had this rapid trial and error process. He would make rapid decisions. If they didn't work out, he would step back, and he just kept on doing that. He was like a machine. He was a trial and error machine. I guess proved him really well in the field of biochemistry. Craig later founded a company called Celera. Ventor was a charismatic leader, but all charismatic leaders are hypomanics. John says that. John says all charismatic leaders are hypomanics. The hypomanic saying, "Give me greatness or give me death." Craig is a descendant of Meriwether Lewis. This was kind of funny because uh, Bill Clinton referred to Craig Venter as Meriwether Lewis because of his discoveries with biochemistry. But it turns out that Craig is actually a descendant of Meriwether Lewis. Is Mormon Church confirmed. So this also kind of shows how hypomanic tendencies can be hereditary. Alright, so this kind of goes into the end of the book where John likes to talk about hypomania in the past evolution and then what he thinks about hypomania in the future. So before I go into the past, he kind of talks about how people study primates, especially chimpanzees, and how there are certain males that charge in the war regardless. And he always said those tendencies are also in humans. So humans need bipolar and hypomanic genes to survive. All territorial expansion, either be physical territory, or let's say outer space, or let's just say any type of advancement, needs to be led by charismatic males which are all hypomanic. Capitalism and America thrive on hypomanic people. America arguably was founded by hypomanic people since we have hypomanic tendencies. The paradox is the traits that push mankind continuously achieve are actually quite primitive. Hypomania future, the three predictions. America is a hypomanic nation. America will continue to act like one, sometimes wisely or sometimes not. Immigrants are America's golden stream. If immigration stops, America's success will be stagnant and will mark the end of the American empire. So John kind of pushes forward that and America needs to replenish itself with immigrants for America to continue to be America, not just in the like our values, but also to act as America. Number 3, in future advancement, John is afraid of that defected genes will get aborted, leaving the hypomanic person to become extinct. So what he's basically saying is he's afraid we're going to come out with technology that is going to, while someone is pregnant, is going to look at the genes of that child and show that these genes are not okay, we have to abort this child. He's afraid that is going to happen, and he thinks that if that does happen, then hypomanic people will become extinct, would eventually, over, I guess you could say, thousands of years, if those genes continue to be snuffed out, it will lead to the extinction of the human race. Thank you very much for watching the video. Please subscribe, like, comment. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe. If you've read this book or found this video informational, comment below and we could talk about it. So this is kind of the thing I wanted to do with this section of my YouTube channel, is that look through any of the books I've reviewed, watch them. If you've read any of the books, comment them down. What did you think about the book? Yada, 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 yada. Alright guys, remember to like and press that subscribe button. Peace out. Ciao.